The sharp sound of tearing paper echoed across the marble lobby. As my sister ripped the $5 million federal check into pieces right in front of my 7-year-old son, she smirked with pure arrogance. She thought she was humiliating a broke, dirt-stained single mother. She had no idea she had just signed the death warrant for her billion-dollar financial syndicate. By the end of the day, the elite would learn how to bow. Hello, dear listeners of Maya Revenge Stories. We want to thank you from the bottom of our hearts for your endless support. But unfortunately, YouTube has completely disabled our monetization, leaving us without the budget to keep operating here. Because of this, we will be forced to stop uploading new videos on this platform in the near future and will transition our work entirely to Patreon. If you find today's story captivating, please support us by joining the Maya Revenge Stories Patreon, where you can listen to exclusive, true stories that are even better, much longer, and feature incredibly detailed situations that we simply cannot make public on YouTube, brought to life by multiple emotional voice actors in a single story. You can join by scanning the QR code on your screen or by clicking the Patreon link in the description or the pinned comment of this video. Now, let us begin today's story, told from the perspective of a woman named Martha Contreras. I am 38 years old, and my son Mateo is just 7. Together, we step through the towering, heavy glass doors into the magnificent, marble-lined lobby of the Oak Haven Financial Syndicate, right in the beating heart of downtown Chicago. The contrast between us and our surroundings was immediate, jarring, and violently clear. I was dressed in my faded tactical field gear. My heavy canvas boots were thickly caked with dried mud, a lingering souvenir from an exhausting, week-long underground site inspection. The air inside the sprawling lobby was climate-controlled to absolute perfection, carrying the distinct, heavy scent of expensive designer perfumes, freshly polished stone, and the undeniable aroma of untethered wealth. All around us, corporate tycoons, hedge fund managers, and elite executives glided smoothly across the flawless floor in $1,000 tailored suits, holding their heads high with the practiced arrogance of the untouchable class. Mateo instinctively hugged his worn-out astronaut backpack tightly to his small chest. He shrank back, pulling his shoulders in, and timidly pressed himself against my leg. Even at the tender age of 7, he was perceptive enough to feel the crushing weight of the room. The pristine receptionists, with their immaculate hair and flawless makeup, paused their typing to stare. The burly security guards stationed by the velvet ropes narrowed their eyes, assessing us with piercing, contemptuous glares. They looked at us as though we were lost, filthy strays that had somehow managed to wander into a sacred temple of finance. The judgment in their eyes was heavy and unapologetic. However, I was not there to beg, nor was I looking for any sort of charitable handout from the elite. Hidden securely within the inner breast pocket of my worn tactical jacket was a highly classified, certified proxy check for exactly $5 million. It was the initial security deposit authorized directly by TIDA, the Tactical Infrastructure Defense Agency, a top-secret federal strategic infrastructure command where I currently served. My sole mission for the morning was to hand-deliver this massive deposit to the Chief Operating Officer of Oak Haven. That Chief Operating Officer happened to be Eleanor, my very own biological sister, standing there in that cavernous, hostile space. A brief but intense wave of bitter memories washed over my mind. Eleanor had always looked down on me with a sneering sense of superiority. She deeply despised me for actively abandoning lucrative corporate opportunities to pursue a grueling, dangerous, and decidedly unglamorous military career. In her pristine world, a person's worth was measured exclusively by their bank balances, their zip code, and the luxury cars they drove. I still vividly remembered the cruel, triumphant satisfaction on her face when I went through my painful divorce and walked away with absolutely nothing but the clothes on my back and my beautiful son. She had gloated relentlessly, openly telling me, "You are a naive, pathetic fool who chose meaningless honor over financial survival." The atmosphere in this grand lobby grew increasingly suffocating, thick with silent judgment, whispered insults, and cold alienation. Yet, I absolutely refused to let their haughty glares break my spirit. I drew upon my years of rigorous military training and iron discipline. I stood perfectly still, projecting an aura of absolute calm and patience, anchoring myself to the marble floor like a seasoned soldier quietly awaiting her next set of critical orders. Reaching down, I placed a steady, gentle hand on Mateo's small shoulder, deliberately transmitting all my warmth, strength, and maternal reassurance down to him. I needed him to feel in his bones that despite the glittering, superficial hostility of this towering fortress, he was entirely safe as long as he was by my side. We just had to hold our ground and wait for Eleanor to descend from her ivory tower. The soft chime of the VIP elevator, echoing across the vast expanse of the lobby, signaled her arrival. The polished brass doors slid open with a whisper, and out stepped Eleanor, flanked by a small entourage of elite clients. She looked every inch the chief operating officer of a billion-dollar syndicate. Her tailored designer suit was sharp enough to draw blood, her posture rigidly perfect, and her heels clicked against the marble with the rhythmic authority of a dictator surveying her domain. She was mid-laugh, charming an older gentleman in a bespoke tuxedo, when her perfectly manicured hand suddenly tightened around her leather portfolio. She had spotted us. I watched the color drain from her face for a fraction of a second, only to be instantly replaced by a deep, furious crimson that crept up her neck. Her pristine, carefully curated sanctuary of wealth was being polluted by the presence of her failure of a sister and a child in scuffed sneakers. The embarrassment radiating from her was palpable. Any decent executive, or even a marginally functional human being, would have swiftly ushered us into a private conference room to handle a family matter away from prying eyes. But Eleanor was not driven by decency. She was driven by an insatiable need for dominance. Instead of a discreet approach, she abandoned her clients with a forced, apologetic smile and marched directly into the center of the grand lobby. She wanted an audience. She wanted a stage. She stopped several feet away from us, crossing her arms over her chest as she looked me up and down with exaggerated disgust. "Martha," she announced, projecting her voice so loudly that the typing at the reception desks completely ceased. "What on earth are you doing in my building looking like a vagrant? If you are here to beg for a handout because you finally realized playing soldier does not pay the rent, you are entirely out of luck. I told you years ago I would not fund your pathetic life choices." The sheer venom in her tone was designed to crush, to strip away whatever dignity she assumed I had left. I felt Mateo flinch violently against my leg. I took a slow, measured breath, letting her toxic vanity wash over me without leaving a mark. I did not raise my voice, nor did I offer a defense against her petty accusations. I simply maintained absolute emotional control, walked smoothly toward the nearest polished mahogany reception counter, and reached into the breast pocket of my tactical jacket. With deliberate, fluid precision, I withdrew the classified federal proxy check and placed it face up on the cold marble surface. The overhead chandeliers caught the intricate, three-dimensional holographic anti-counterfeit stamp, making it shimmer with undeniable authenticity. "I am not here for a family reunion, Eleanor," I said, my voice steady, professional, and devoid of warmth. "I require you to execute the encrypted escrow process for this initial security deposit immediately." Eleanor let out an exasperated sigh, rolling her eyes as she stepped forward to glance at the piece of paper. Her eyes flicked down to the amount. For one solitary second, the mask of arrogant superiority slipped. Her pupils dilated. Her jaw went slack, and her breath hitched in her throat as her brain tried to process the words written across the heavy security paper. $5 million. But the realization did not bring clarity. Instead, it triggered a defense mechanism built on decades of deeply ingrained prejudice. A second later, Eleanor threw her head back and let out a shrill, piercing laugh that echoed harshly off the high ceilings. It was a cruel, grating sound that made my skin crawl. $5 million? She shrieked, pointing a trembling, manicured finger at the document. "Are you absolutely out of your mind? A lowly, mud-stained wage earner like you holding a $5 million government check? You either stole this, or you are running some incredibly stupid forgery scam. You really thought you could walk into a top-tier financial institution with a fake piece of paper and play pretend? Her outburst acted like a magnetic force. The wealthy VIP clients, the junior executives holding their tablets, and the previously statuesque receptionists began to drift closer, forming a suffocating, judgmental ring around us. They murmured to one another behind raised hands, their eyes darting from my faded canvas boots to Mateo's worn-out backpack. I could hear their quiet scoffs, the rustle of expensive silk, and the click of leather shoes as they closed the circle. The air grew unbearably thick with their collective disdain. I felt two small hands grip the fabric of my trousers with desperate strength. I glanced down and saw Mateo's lower lip quivering, his large brown eyes welling up with heavy, unshed tears. The public humiliation his own aunt was subjecting us to was breaking his little heart. He did not understand the intricate power plays of the elite. He only understood that his mother was being viciously mocked by a crowd of strangers. A cold, dangerous fury ignited in the very center of my chest, burying the sisterly connection I once thought we shared. I stepped slightly in front of Mateo, shielding him from the hungry stares of the crowd, and locked my gaze onto Eleanor. I lowered my pitch, adopting the exact razor-sharp tone I used when briefing operatives for a lethal engagement. "I strongly suggest you pick up that scanner," I warned her, my voice carrying a quiet, freezing weight that cut right through the murmurs of the crowd. "Scan the barcode. Eleanor, do it right now, before you destroy something you can never, ever afford to replace." But my warning fell entirely on deaf ears. The intoxicating allure of performing for her wealthy peers, the blind rush of absolute corporate power, had completely severed her connection to reason. She looked at me not as a federal officer giving a lawful directive, nor as a sister offering a final lifeline, but as an insect waiting to be crushed under the heel of her designer shoe. She stood proudly at the very edge of a catastrophic cliff, completely blinded by her own vanity, totally unaware of the lethal drop that awaited her. Eleanor did not just refuse to scan the barcode. Driven by a toxic cocktail of arrogance and a desperate need to flex her absolute authority in front of the watching VIP clients and her observing superiors, she snatched the heavy security paper right off the polished mahogany counter. A vicious, triumphant smirk stretched across her perfectly painted lips, contorting her features into a mask of pure cruelty. "This is absolute garbage," she declared, her voice ringing out with theatrical projection so that every single wealthy bystander in the vicinity could hear her judgment. "And I do not tolerate garbage in my lobby." With a sharp, dramatic flick of her wrists, Eleanor ripped the certified government document right down the middle. The sharp, tearing sound of the heavy fibers giving way was deafening in the suddenly quiet room, but she did not stop there. She placed the halves together and tore them again, and then again, shredding the irreplaceable document into dozens of jagged little fragments. With a dismissive flick of her manicured fingers, she tossed the remnants into the air. The white scraps of paper fluttered down like a grotesque snowfall, landing softly against the thick, dried mud caked on my canvas boots. A few pieces drifted onto the worn fabric of Mateo's little astronaut backpack. Looking at those torn pieces of paper resting on his beloved bag, my 7-year-old son could no longer hold back his terror. He let out a loud, breathless sob, burying his tear-streaked face deep into my thigh. His small body shook violently, entirely overwhelmed by the sheer, unprovoked wickedness of the adults surrounding him. The familial bond I once thought might still exist somewhere deep within my sister shattered completely in that exact moment, just like the torn pieces of paper littering the floor. Eleanor, completely devoid of empathy for her own nephew, simply rolled her eyes at his tears. She raised her hand and snapped her fingers sharply toward the periphery of the room. "Take her down," Eleanor commanded, gesturing toward the head of security. "Restrain this pathetic fraudster and call the police immediately. I want her thrown in a jail cell where she belongs." The head of security was a massive, hulking brute of a man, clearly a former debt collector or a hired thug who had somehow managed to secure a corporate badge. He weighed easily 250 pounds, built like a brick wall and eager to inflict pain to impress his corporate masters. A cruel, predatory smile spread across his thick face as he cracked his knuckles and lunged toward me with entirely unnecessary aggression. His massive hands reached out, fully intending to violently twist my arm behind my back and force me to my knees. As he charged, his reckless, sweeping motion brought his thick forearm dangerously close to Mateo. His cuff forcefully brushed right past my little boy's hair, generating a sudden gust of wind that made Mateo cry out in fresh panic. That was the trigger. The calm, patient mother, enduring a humiliating family dispute, instantly ceased to exist. The disciplined restraint I had carefully maintained completely evaporated, replaced in a microsecond by the cold, lethal instinct of an active-duty combat commander. My eyes locked onto the towering guard, and my vision tunneled into pure tactical assessment. I did not retreat. I did not take a single step backward. As his heavy hand reached for my shoulder, I moved. It was a flawless, razor-sharp execution of close-quarters combat, stripped of all hesitation and completely devoid of wasted motion, with my left arm remaining securely wrapped around Mateo, pressing his small frame safely behind the unyielding shield of my body. My right hand shot forward like a coiled viper. I clamped my grip around the security guard's thick wrist, my fingers perfectly finding the critical pressure points between his heavy bones. Before his brain could even register that his target had fought back, I pivoted my hips, dropping my center of gravity to establish an immovable anchor, using the sheer momentum of his own aggressive charge against him. I applied a brutal, bone-wrenching torsion to his joint. The massive man let out a strangled gasp of agony as the lock forced his entire body to contort violently in the air, taking full advantage of the leverage. I swept his leading leg and slammed him downward with terrifying force. It took exactly 2 seconds. The deafening, sickening thud of 250 pounds of muscle and bone violently colliding face first with the unforgiving marble floor echoed like a gunshot through the sprawling lobby. The guard lay completely immobilized at my muddy boots, groaning in a haze of pain and shock. His arm trapped in a joint lock so tight that a single millimeter of additional pressure would snap his limb in half. I stood perfectly anchored over him, my breathing entirely steady, my left hand holding my son safely behind my leg, and my eyes radiating a freezing, deadly promise to anyone else who dared to step forward. A collective, horrified gasp rippled through the suffocating ring of spectators. The elite clients and junior executives scrambled backward in absolute terror, their expensive leather shoes slipping frantically against the polished marble. The remaining security personnel, at least 5 heavily built men, immediately drew their stun batons. The harsh electrical crackle of the weapons echoed in the vast space as they completely surrounded me. Yet, not a single one of them dared to take another step forward. My posture was rooted, an impenetrable defensive stance forged through years of brutal combat experience. The freezing, deadly aura radiating from me paralyzed them, effectively anchoring their heavy boots to the floor. They knew, with absolute certainty, that whoever lunged first would meet the same agonizing fate as their squad leader, who was still groaning at my feet. Seeing her security force rendered entirely useless by a single woman, Eleanor completely lost what remained of her polished, corporate composure. She began to shriek maniacally, her voice cracking with frantic desperation. "She is unstable. She has severe military mental illness," she screamed, gesturing wildly at me. She turned to the terrified crowd of VIPs. "Take out your phones. Film her. Show the entire internet what a violent, psychotic lunatic my sister truly is. We need this on record for when they lock her up in a psychiatric ward." Dozens of smartphones instantly rose into the air, their camera lenses zooming in on my muddy boots and Mateo's frightened face. The situation was teetering on the edge of a violent riot. Recognizing the tactical threshold had been reached, I smoothly released my punishing grip on the fallen guard's wrist. I took one deliberate, measured step backward, leaving him writhing on the stone, moving with exaggerated slowness. I raised both of my arms, keeping my hands fully open with my palms facing outward. It was the universal, standard military posture to prove one is entirely unarmed and harmless. The crowd thought I was finally surrendering, but as I stood there in total silence, I slowly tilted my head upward, my eyes locked dead center onto the blinking red light of the primary dome security camera mounted above the reception desk. The corner of my mouth twitched upward into a quiet, chilling, and highly calculated smile. The bait had been taken, and the steel jaws of the trap were about to snap shut. Before Eleanor could bark another command, a deafening, bone-rattling wail tore through the air outside the building. It was not the standard, high-pitched siren of the local city police. This was the deep, aggressive, heavy mechanical roar of federal emergency vehicles. The massive, reinforced tempered glass doors of the Oakhaven lobby did not just slide open, they were violently thrust apart. A fully armed, elite squad of federal tactical agents stormed into the sanctuary of wealth. They moved with terrifying, synchronized precision, clad in heavy black tactical armor, Kevlar helmets, and carrying suppressed assault rifles. Emblazoned across their chests in stark, imposing white letters was the insignia of my command, TIDA. Through the shattered illusion of safety, the wealthy patrons looked out the floor-to-ceiling windows and screamed. An imposing convoy of at least 12 fully armored, pitch-black utility vehicles had violently jumped the curbs, perfectly blockading every single entrance and exit of the financial syndicate. Heavily armed operators poured out, securing the perimeter with military efficiency. A voice, amplified through a heavy megaphone, boomed across the chaotic plaza outside and echoed into the lobby. This facility is now under a federal-level lockdown. No one enters, no one leaves. The lobby erupted into absolute, unadulterated panic. Billionaires and executives dropped their expensive briefcases, screaming and ducking behind mahogany counters. Yet, in the midst of this overwhelming, tactical nightmare, Eleanor completely misread the situation. Driven by her own blind arrogance, she genuinely believed she had won. She threw her head back and let out a manic, triumphant laugh that pierced the chaos. She pointed her manicured finger right at my face, her eyes wide with delusional victory. "Do you see this?" Eleanor screamed over the sirens, looking at the charging tactical team and then back at me. "Do you see what happens when you try to pass forged federal documents in my building? The federal agents are here for you. They are going to drag you out of here in chains, and you will rot in a federal prison for the rest of your miserable life." The chaotic symphony of shrieking executives and shouting tactical agents was suddenly pierced by the sharp, authoritative ding of the private chairman elevator, located at the far end of the grand hall. The heavy, gold-plated doors slid open violently. Out sprinted Julian Croft, the billionaire chief executive officer of the Oakhaven Financial Syndicate. This was a man who usually moved with the slow, calculated grace of a predator who owned the world. Today, however, he was entirely stripped of his legendary composure. His custom-tailored jacket was unbuttoned and flapping wildly behind him. Heavy beads of cold sweat drenched his forehead, matting his expensive haircut to his skin. His face was entirely drained of color, possessing the sickly, translucent pallor of a man who had just looked directly into the eyes of the Grim Reaper. He practically stumbled over the plush carpets, his chest heaving as he frantically scanned the chaotic lobby. Eleanor, entirely misinterpreting the sheer terror on her superior's face, puffed out her chest. She smoothed down the lapels of her designer suit, her face glowing with the radiant, sickening pride of an employee who believed she had just saved her company from a massive fraud operation. She took a confident step forward, stepping directly into Julian Croft's frantic path, an eager, sycophantic smile stretching across her face. "Mr. Croft, thank goodness you are here," Eleanor announced loudly, her voice practically vibrating with self-importance, so the surrounding crowd and the armed agents could hear her. "I have already handled the situation. This deranged woman attempted to pass a forged federal document, but I apprehended her and—" She never finished her sentence. Julian Croft did not slow down. He did not issue a verbal reprimand. Instead, with a raw, desperate strength born of absolute panic, the billionaire raised both of his hands and shoved his chief operating officer violently out of his way. The force of the unexpected blow caught Eleanor squarely in the chest. She gasped in shock, her high heels twisting out from under her as she crashed hard into a decorative mahogany pillar before collapsing in an undignified heap onto the marble floor. Julian did not even spare her a downward glance. He kept running until he reached the center of the lobby, stopping exactly 3 feet away from my mud-caked canvas boots, the most powerful financial titan in Chicago. A man who regularly dined with senators and foreign dignitaries abruptly snapped his heels together. He stood at perfect, rigid attention, his hands pinned tightly to his sides. Then, right in front of the dozens of smartphone cameras still recording, in front of his wealthy elite clients, and in front of his entire trembling staff, Julian Croft bent entirely at the waist. He executed a flawless, rigid 90-degree bow, holding his head far lower than mine in a display of total, unquestioning submission. "Colonel Contreras!" Julian shouted, his voice cracking with raw fear and echoing off the vaulted ceilings for every single person in the room to hear. "I apologize 1,000 times for this absolute humiliation. We are entirely at your mercy." The sprawling lobby instantly plunged into the deafening, suffocating silence of a graveyard. The wealthy VIPs froze, their ringing phones slipping from their manicured fingers. The security guards, still holding their stun batons, went completely pale, their jaws dropping in synchronized horror. Even the breathing of the crowd seemed to stop. The invincible, arrogant illusion of Oakhaven Financial shattered into a million irreparable pieces in that single echoing moment. Julian remained folded in his submissive bow for several agonizing seconds before he finally dared to stand upright. He was trembling violently. His wild eyes darted down to the floor, instantly locking onto the scattered, jagged white fragments of the certified document lying in the mud near my boots. A guttural sob of sheer devastation escaped his throat. He dropped to his hands and knees, scrambling across the polished stone in his $1,000 trousers. His trembling fingers desperately tried to scrape up the torn shreds of paper, clutching them to his chest as if they were pieces of his own beating heart. He slowly turned his head to look at Eleanor, who was just now struggling to push herself up from the floor, her face a mask of absolute bewilderment. "You arrogant, mindless fool," Julian roared, his voice tearing through the silence with a feral, monstrous fury. The veins in his neck bulged against his collar. "Do you have any idea what you have just destroyed? This was not a standard check. This was the unique, encrypted activation key for the $1.2 billion federal infrastructure contract, the very same contract that our syndicate has spent the last 3 years begging, pleading, and practically bleeding to secure from the government. You just tore our entire future into pieces." Eleanor's eyes widened to the size of saucers. Her mouth opened and closed silently, like a fish pulled out of water. She looked frantically from the sobbing billionaire on the floor to the shredded paper, and finally up to me, her muddy, supposedly worthless sister. The fatal twist was finally laid bare under the blazing chandeliers. I was not just a low-ranking soldier. I was the supreme commander of the Tactical Infrastructure Defense Agency's newest continental defense project, and that piece of heavy security paper was never meant to be deposited into a standard bank account. It was embedded with a highly classified, military-grade microchip. It was a rigorous, federal compliance test, a final audit of character and security protocol, before entrusting a civilian corporation with over $1 billion of taxpayer funds and national security secrets. The protocol was simple. "Eleanor," I said, my voice completely flat, devoid of any sympathy, cutting through the heavy air like a surgical blade. "Scan the barcode. That was all you had to do to initiate the transfer and save your failing syndicate. But your blinding arrogance failed the compliance test. By destroying that encrypted microchip, you did not just instantly and permanently void your company's life-saving contract. You actively destroyed classified government property." I looked down at her, my posture as unyielding as iron. "Under federal law, you are now officially charged with the direct sabotage of national strategic assets." The gravity of those words finally broke through her impenetrable shell of vanity. The color vanished from her skin entirely. The realization that she had just annihilated a $1.2 billion deal and committed a federal felony all in the span of 5 minutes crashed down upon her like a collapsing skyscraper. Eleanor's knees gave out completely. She slumped to the floor, her perfectly tailored suit pooling around her in a pathetic heap. The haughty, untouchable executive was gone. In her place was a broken, terrified woman. She dragged herself across the marble, crawling on her hands and knees until she reached my boots. Tears streamed down her face, ruining her flawless makeup, leaving dark, pathetic streaks across her cheeks. "Martha, please," Eleanor sobbed hysterically, her voice a desperate, raspy whine. She reached out, with trembling hands, trying to grab the fabric of my trousers. "Please, I am so sorry, I did not know. You cannot do this to me. Martha, we are family. We share the same blood. You have to tell them it was a mistake. Please, have mercy on your own sister." I looked down at the woman who had mercilessly mocked my poverty, celebrated my divorce, and deliberately terrorized my 7-year-old son just moments prior. I felt nothing but a cold, clinical detachment. I did not raise my voice, nor did I offer a comforting hand. I simply took one deliberate, measured step backward, letting her grasping hands fall empty onto the cold floor. I gave a curt, silent nod to the tactical squad leader standing by the shattered doors. 4 heavily armored federal agents immediately broke formation and marched forward. They grabbed Eleanor by the arms, hauling her roughly off the floor. The harsh, metallic ratcheting sound of heavy steel handcuffs locking securely around her wrists echoed loudly in the silent lobby. As the lead agent loudly recited her Miranda rights and the federal charges against her, she thrashed and wailed, her desperate screams bouncing off the marble walls. I stood perfectly still, shielding Mateo's eyes as I watched them drag my sister toward the armored vehicles waiting outside, taking her away into the glaring red and blue lights of absolute ruin, with Eleanor's frantic screams fading into the wail of sirens outside. The suffocating silence returned to the lobby. Heavier than before, Julian Croft, still kneeling on the cold marble floor amidst the ruined scraps of his company's future, scrambled to salvage whatever he could. His trembling hands reached inside his tailored jacket, pulling out a personal, gold-embossed checkbook with a gold fountain pen. He hastily scribbled his signature across the bottom line, leaving the monetary amount completely blank. He held the blank check up toward me, his eyes wide with a pathetic, desperate pleading. "Name your price, Colonel Contreras," Julian begged, his voice cracking under the crushing weight of his impending ruin. "Write down any number you desire. Take 10 million. Take 50 million. Just please, I am begging you, reinstate the federal contract. If word of this sabotage reaches the press, our stock price will face a catastrophic sell-off when the markets open tomorrow morning. We will be entirely wiped out. I will pay whatever it takes to make this go away." I did not even look at the piece of paper trembling in his hand. Instead, I slowly crouched down and gently lifted Mateo into my arms. I held my 7-year-old son tightly against my chest, feeling his small heartbeat finally begin to slow down, with a soft, reassuring touch. I wiped away the lingering tears from his cheeks. I kissed his forehead, letting him know the storm was over. Only then did I turn my gaze back to Julian Croft and the circle of Chicago's most powerful elites, who were now watching me with raw, undisguised terror. "I do not sell military honor for dirty money, Mr. Croft," I declared, my voice echoing with unyielding authority, striking the walls of the grand hall like a gavel. "I did not come here today just to deliver a deposit, and I certainly did not come here to be bought. I am here to restructure your rot." Julian lowered the blank check, swallowing hard as he stared up at me. "Under the emergency contingency clauses of the Tactical Infrastructure Defense Agency mandate, which you have just catastrophically violated, I am taking immediate executive action," I continued, making sure every single executive and board member present heard my words perfectly. "By the end of this business day, your board of directors will officially terminate every single executive, manager, and associate within Eleanor's inner circle. You will completely purge the sycophants who have enabled, protected, and thrived on this toxic culture of extreme arrogance and class contempt for years. If I find a single one of her cronies still drawing a salary from this syndicate by tomorrow, the federal government will seize your entire operation." The executives standing in the crowd instantly paled, realizing their lavish careers were evaporating before their very eyes. But I was not finished. "Furthermore," I stated, my tone leaving absolutely zero room for negotiation, "to compensate for the severe breach of national security protocols, Oak Haven Financial Syndicate will permanently allocate exactly 15% of its total annual net profits to establish a new federal trust. This trust will be named Mateo's Shield. It will be placed under strict permanent federal supervision. The funds will be exclusively used to provide substantial startup capital and completely free, permanent housing for vulnerable, disabled, and displaced military veterans. You will spend the rest of your corporate existence working to house the very people your sister just mocked as mud-stained wage earners." Julian Croft slowly lowered his head, entirely defeated. He had no choice but to accept the total restructuring of his empire. "Yes, Colonel," he whispered to the floor. "It will be done exactly as you command." The financial titans of Chicago. The people who had looked at us like garbage just an hour ago were now completely bowed, their power entirely broken by the quiet discipline of a soldier they had vastly underestimated, leaving behind a crumbling financial empire that was now forced to completely rewrite its rules of existence. I adjusted my grip on Mateo. I held his small hand in mine, and together, we turned our backs on the marble sanctuary of vanity. We walked proudly out through the shattered glass doors and stepped into the brilliant, blazing afternoon sunlight. The crisp city air filled my lungs. I looked down at my son, giving him a warm, triumphant smile. Today, he did not just witness the fall of a bully. He learned the most vital lesson I could ever teach him. He learned that true power is never used to trample on the weak, but rather, it is the unbreakable shield we forge to protect them. Thank you so much, dear listeners, for staying with me until the very end of this incredible journey. Where in the world are you tuning in from today? Please let us know in the comments. If you found today's story engaging and satisfying, we kindly remind you that our channel has lost its monetization, meaning we will strictly not be uploading any new videos on YouTube in the near future. We are transitioning all of our operations over to Patreon. Please help us keep these stories alive by joining the Maya Revenge Stories Patreon, where you can listen to our absolute best, longest, and most exclusive true stories that we simply cannot make public on YouTube. You can easily join us by scanning the Patreon QR code currently on your screen, or by using the direct link provided in the description or the pinned comment below. Thank you once again, and we cannot wait to see you there.